Shalom, shalom, everybody. Shavua Tov. I am sitting with Dr. Mrs.
Ms.
Professor
Alyza.
Ms. Alyza Lewin, who is a powerhouse of a woman. I had the merit of sitting and interviewing Alyza, must have been like 4 or 5 years ago, here in D.C. about her legal work on behalf of students fighting the anti-Semitism on college campuses, which today is like, it's blowing up all over the place. But back when we spoke, again, this is 4 or 5 years ago, it wasn't on the radar of the Jewish community, but it was happening, and hence Alyza was working on it back then. She is the president of the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, and it's that organization, not connected with the Brandeis University, that she does all this legal work on behalf of students against anti-Semitism. And here we are at the IAC Summit in D.C., and you were on some of the panels. And I wanted you to share, before we get into the whole anti-Semitism today, your advice or feedback in the discussion for parents who are fearful for their children in college campuses or about to go to college here in America. So if you'd share those words, because those were really powerful.
Sure. So I did. I spoke this morning with a group of parents, and at the end of our conversation, when they asked, what's a tip for parents? And I said, the truth is, what you really need to do is make sure that your children know their roots, that they know their history, that they know their heritage. Because, and I took it from today's Parshat HaShavua, actually, right?
Ki Tavo.
Ki Tavo, and where it talks about how here we are, we're about to enter the land of Israel, and what do we learn about when we plant the lands, like the first fruits, we take them, the bikurim, but what do we say, right? Arami Oved Avi, right? We go back to our origins, to our history, to our heritage, to make sure that everybody knows exactly where we came from, what our history was, Avram Avinu, Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? We need to know those stories. And the truth is, studies show, and this is what I said to the parents, studies show that if you want your children to be strong and confident and resilient, the more they know about their history, their roots, their heritage, they know about their parents, their grandparents, where they came from, what their history is, the greater their comfort, their strength, their resilience is. And so as the Jewish people, that's the #1 key. And we need to remember that the greatest and strongest and best antidote to bullying and discrimination is self-confidence and pride. And you want that self-confidence and pride, you need to instill that by teaching your children their roots and their heritage.
Right, and this is a message. Talk about it all the time. And I actually had a few conversations about this with a few people here, and they were happily surprised when they heard me say it. And I imagine you'll agree with me, because one thing I always tell people is anti-Semitism is on the top of our minds today. The headline news in the Jewish community today, right? I'm like, and then all this money is being donated towards fighting anti-Semitism. And I tell people, that's a misnomer. And that is also giving false hope. Anti-Semitism always was, always will be. It's been ups and downs, right? It's never not going to be no anti-Semitism. We can't beat anti-Semitism. So the way we have to prepare our children in life, especially on campuses, it's not, this is how you fight anti-Semitism. It's like, this is how you be the proudest, strongest Jew you can be, in order that, as you said, scare off the anti-Semitic bullies and it doesn't affect you, which too many Jewish students are being embarrassed about their Jewish identity and then just running away.
Yes. At the same time, I will say that what we also need to do, and this is what the Brandeis Center is making sure that first of all, that you have a civil rights movement for Jews, right? In other words, the laws apply to protect from harassment and discrimination. Those laws apply to Jews as well, right? And so you need the system to recognize the harassment and discrimination of Jews, because there are those then who have a legal obligation to protect Jews. And we want to make sure, for example, that the universities are taking the steps to protect our Jewish students from the harassment and discrimination. And if they're not, then they need to be held accountable. And so those efforts do need to be taken to address the anti-Semitism. And you're right, it won't go away, because it does. It comes and goes in waves. But at least when it happens,
Could be dealt with.
Exactly.
Right.
It needs to
Agreed.
be handled.
100%.
Absolutely.
Are you able to share any feedback that some of the parents might have given you after you gave those comments to them?
I think there was positive feedback, at least certainly from the in the group we had, and from my co-panelists too, who all acknowledged that. I mean, there's no doubt, right, that the best way to combat anti-Semitism is to make sure that our students and our children, right, recognize that they're part of something much greater than themselves. You know, if you think about it, so Natan Sharansky, right? I had the really the pleasure and the honor a couple of months ago to sit and to talk with him, and he will say, right, that part of what gave him the strength was recognizing that he was part of something much larger than himself. But one of the things that he said to me when I talked to him recently was that when he was a refusenik, he realized that one of the most important audiences that he needed to reach were the folks who silently agreed with him, but were too afraid to speak up and actually push back, right? And he called those folks the double thinkers. And what he was really impressed by was that at Columbia University, last semester, at the end of the spring, there were over 500 Jewish students who signed a letter with their full names, which basically was pushing back and saying, don't you speak in my name, right? I will tell you what my identity is, right? I will define my identity, and shame on the university for not protecting me to enable me to fully engage on this campus with my full identity as a Jew. And he said what was really interesting is all 500 plus of those students, by signing in their full names, became dissenters, right? They were active dissenters. They were no longer double thinkers. And he said when he was a refusenik, they estimated that you needed to get 1/5 of the population to become active dissenters. And he said what we need today on the campuses, and I say it's actually beyond the campuses, is hundreds and thousands of people like this to be saying in their own name, signing letters, making statements, saying this is my identity. I have every right. I am a proud Jew, a proud Zionist, and I have every right to fully engage in society today, in campus, and all the activities and all the clubs, but beyond, I say beyond campus, right? And all the activist organizations, whatever it is, my cause, my issue is, with my full identity. You have no right to demand that I somehow have to feel that my history or my heritage is something that I either should be ashamed of, or that I have to disavow, or that I have to deny. No, right? That's really the root of what's going on now, and that is the way we need to combat today's anti-Semitism.
So good segue, because beforehand we were discussing the fact, I was saying, like, here we were at this conference, it's over, by the way, I'm hopefully going home, if not too many rockets are being shot and El Al continues to fly and I can get home, but that in this conference was very much was focused on the anti-Semitism and dealing with it. But one thing that I felt was missing was the elephant in the room, which, again, anyone who follows me know that we had this conference last year, 2 summers ago in Jerusalem, which is uncovering the anti-Semitism behind the Palestinian national movement. Like, that's where it's coming from, and still the Jewish community is not talking about it. They're still ignoring that issue, that's the core of the growth of the anti-Semitism today, especially on college campuses. And I mentioned the movie that my father-in-law was in, Rabbi Charles Scheer, when he was the director of Hillel at Columbia University. Again, this is over 20 years ago. And it was Columbia Unbecoming, I think 2002 around. And in that movie, students were being interviewed, and he as well, talking about how they were being discriminated against and by professors, and how the university was not dealing with it, again, because of this Palestinian national movement. Whether they were grades were being lowered because they wrote things, or they had to shut up, or discrimination in classes. And this was being discussed over 20 years ago. And the Jewish community totally ignored it, ignored the movie, ignored the messages, ignored the fact that these prominent professors and provosts, whatever, was allowing it to happen at Columbia University. And then you started telling me, Avi, it's so much deeper. Can you share what you were saying?
Sure. So first, I want to agree with you. This has been going on for years on campus. And before October 7th, there were many people who didn't recognize it, or who thought that those of us who were working in this space were blowing the issue out of proportion. It's not so bad.
In terms of anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Anti-Semitism on college campuses, right? And I think one of the biggest challenges we still face today is trying to get folks to actually recognize the harassment and discrimination that's taking place, because they mistakenly think that what they're witnessing is a good faith political debate, and they miss the vilification of Jews. They don't understand that it's not an actual debate. It's not a dialogue. It's not a discussion. So for years, for example, on the university campuses, you had those who were spewing this distorted, hateful narrative about Israelis and Jews. But the idea was really boiled down to a simple equation, which was, the Star of David, Magen David equals Zionist equals whatever this evil concept is. So it would be apartheid or colonizer or ethnic cleansing, now genocide, famine. But that Nazis, that evil was not put there because somebody wanted to actually have a discussion about, well, is it really apartheid? Is it not apartheid? What's the legal definition? Or are there policies that we oppose, but we think that maybe they could be changed because we want to actually get to a point of peace and coexistence? That wasn't what this was about. This was all about just trying to make sure that everyone on the campus knew that person, who wears the Star of David, or that person who's a Zionist, and what does it mean to be a Zionist, and we'll come back to that in a second, equals evil. Right? The Jew is evil, because the Zionist, they weren't talking about Theodor Herzl and political Zionism or ideologies. No. What they were saying is, if you are a Jew who defines your identity as being part of a people that you feel is indigenous to the land of Israel, you're a persona non grata. And the issue is that most Jews define themselves as part of a people indigenous to the land of Israel, right? That is the definition of Jewish identity for the overwhelming majority, even of secular Jews in the United States, who are the ones who are experiencing this anti-Semitism, in many cases, the worst, because there are Jews, right, who come to campus who have lived their whole entire lives really outside of the Jewish bubble. They didn't go to Jewish day schools. They may not have even belonged to a synagogue. And they come to campus and they want to continue doing all those extracurricular activities and being involved in all the causes that they've always felt passionate about: women's rights, LGBTQ rights.
And just be American.
And just be American. Do it the same way they've been doing their whole lives. And suddenly they come to campus and they're being told, wait a minute, what kind of Jew are you? Are you the Jew that believes that Israel has a right to exist? Now, why would you think Israel has a right to exist? Well, you think Israel has a right to exist because if you're a people indigenous to that land, you have a right to self-determination in that land. Well, wait a minute. If that's what you believe, that the Jews are indigenous to this land and have a right to self-determination, we can't accept you. You're not welcome in our club. And not only that, we actually think you're evil. We actually think you're evil. And that, after October 7th, exploded. And it exploded because for years, this is what had been taught on the campuses.
Right, that's the most important thing. It's didn't come from the students. It's been ingrained by the professors for years.
It's been ingrained by professors. It's been ingrained by the scholarship. It's been ingrained
heads of departments
and then repeated, right, by these the rhetoric, right, on the campuses. And so it was almost as if folks had kind of spread dry brush across all these campuses in the United States for years, and October 7th came and lit a match, and all the campuses went up in flames. And now, right after you had, for instance, the hearings with the university presidents, suddenly then the world...
The one when Elise Stefanik did it, and they said in the context. That's all depends upon the context.
All depends upon the context. That's when people suddenly realized, oh, maybe there is a problem on these university campuses.
Wow. It took that to wake people up.
And now it's become extreme. I mean, ADL has what they call their pyramid of hate. And you can see at the bottom of the pyramid is what they call biased attitudes. But then it escalates, right? You go from the biased attitudes to slurs and, discriminatory jokes, kind of. And then it rises from there to actual shunning and exclusion, right? And then it rises from there to some physical violence, like assaults, right? And then it'll go all the way up the top as genocide, right? And if you are a university and you don't take steps to address the biased attitudes, because you're not realizing that what the students are doing is riling up your campus against the Jews, right? And you've done nothing to push back against that. You haven't not said, wait a minute, we cannot tolerate this on our campus. We will not tolerate when one part of our campus tries to turn the community against a community part of our campus, right? Unless you say, we have zero tolerance for that, this is unacceptable, then people begin to think, oh, yeah, this is all I've heard, is these people are evil. I spoke before October 7th. I spoke at one point at NYU, and I was talking about Zionism, because what I have tried to explain, and had to explain also to university administrators, is that Zionism for these students, as it's being defined, is for them an integral part of what it means to be Jewish. It's not a viewpoint. It's not an opinion, right? If you think about it, there are those Jews. Jews define their Judaism in different ways. There are Jews who define their Judaism by religious practice. It's, Shabbat observance, by keeping kosher, by being shomer mitzvot. But then there are many secular Jews who don't define their Jewish identity by religious practice. And overwhelmingly, then, what is it that makes them feel they're Jewish? And it's that they feel they're part of a people. And what defines us as a people are all those stories, right? The stories of we were once, we have the Pesach Seder, we were once slaves in Egypt, and Yetziat Mitzrayim. Or I had a conversation once with a student. I remember she said to me, my family, we did not keep kosher growing up. We did not observe Shabbat. She said, but I once played Queen Esther in my temple's Purim pageant. And I said, oh, so that Purim story you view as your heritage? Of course, right? The Purim story, the Hanukkah story, that's what happened to my people. And so the Jews define themselves as part of a people, and you cannot separate our history and our ancestry and our stories from the land of Israel. And so if you're that kind of Jew that says, I'm part of a people and my history and my ancestry is rooted in the land of Israel, you are a Zionist. And if you are that kind of Zionist, you're not welcome on the campus, and you were being vilified for years. And the university didn't understand that, because universities overwhelmingly thought of Jews as just a faith, right? What did they think? They think we have Jewish students on campus. What do we need to do for them? Well, maybe they need kosher food. Maybe they need a Yom Kippur accommodation. That's it. When they have their DEI, their diversity, equity, and inclusion entities on campus, they think, okay, that group is supposed to protect the ethnic minorities, different minority cultures, ethnicities. They don't think of Jews as an ethnic group. They just think of Jews as a faith, right? So this idea that Jews are somehow being targeted on the basis of our shared ancestry and ethnicity is not something that they were attuned to. Now, on the campuses, it becomes particularly important because the key law that we have, right, that creates a legal obligation for universities to protect students from harassment and discrimination is called Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The catch, though, is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which basically says that any entity that receives federal funding, that money comes with strings attached. If you want to continue to get your federal funds, you have to make sure that all the opportunities you provide are provided in a non-discriminatory fashion. Everybody has to have equal access to all those opportunities, academic and extracurricular. And so the problem is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act does not include religion as a protected category. So this issue came up, especially about 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago, after 9/11. Because after 9/11, Arab and Muslim students were finding themselves, they were being harassed, they were being bullied, and Sikhs who were being mistaken for Muslim were being bullied terribly in the educational systems. And so when you have a violation of Title VI, when they feel that the school is not doing what they need to do to protect the students, you can either file an administrative complaint with the agency that's giving out the money. So when it comes to schools, it's the Department of Education. Or you can go to court and file a lawsuit, which is much more expensive and time-consuming and complex. So many people go the administrative route. And the Department of Education was receiving complaints, this is in the early 2000s, from these Muslim and Sikh individuals. And the original response was, well, this is religious discrimination. We don't cover religious discrimination. The person who then went on to found the Brandeis Center, which I now head, was a fellow by the name of Ken Marcus, who was then the acting assistant secretary for civil rights in the Department of Education. And he said, wait a minute. He said, if you have members of faith-based groups that are being targeted on the basis of one of the other categories under Title VI, race, color, national origin, they don't lose that protection just because they also share a common faith. And he set that out. It's become known as the Marcus Doctrine. And that understanding of Title VI has now been adopted by every successive administration. So that was in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration, all recognize that Title VI covers members of faith-based groups when they're targeted on the basis of their shared ancestry or ethnicity, as opposed to their religious practice. In 2019, I will say just because we're going through now the kind of the legal history, in 2019, when President Trump issued his executive order on combating anti-Semitism, which you may have heard about, completely mischaracterized in the press. It didn't suddenly name the Jews as a race. It didn't suddenly add Jews to this coverage of Title VI. Jews were covered by Title VI, and Jews were covered by Title VI, and the legal basis was, quite frankly, because Jews were, when the civil rights laws were initially passed, considered a race, and considered, right, to have this shared ancestry and ethnicity that entitles them to the civil rights protections. But what the executive order did is it linked this understanding of Title VI with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So what the Executive Order 13899, that's the Trump Executive Order on combating anti-Semitism, said is when the Department of Education gets a complaint alleging anti-Semitism and they're investigating it, how do they know what anti-Semitism is? They're supposed to consider the IHRA definition. That is still effective law today. The Biden administration did not rescind that executive order, and they actually have as current guidance, which they keep referring to, a set of questions and answers on this executive order. And so they are using the IHRA definition when they review these complaints. And that's evident from the fact that the Brandeis Center, for example, we had a complaint that we brought, again, before October 7th, against the University of Vermont. At the University of Vermont, the anti-Semitism there that we include in our complaint was overwhelmingly anti-Zionist in nature. So you had a sexual assault survivor support group. It was the largest support group on campus. We're talking about thousands of student members. And in 2021, this is after the last Gaza conflict, they posted that they were blocking Zionists. Blocking Zionists. Jewish students reached out to try and engage in a conversation. Again, this is not dialogue time. They said, we don't talk to Zionists. We don't talk to the Jewish students. So they were blocking the Zionists from this support group on campus. There was a book club at UVM called the Revolutionary Socialist Union Book Club, advertised on the university webpage. In order to be a member of the book club, you had to pledge no to Zionism. And then there was a teaching assistant who just thrilled to harassing the Zionists online. She actually posted once about the serotonin rush she got from bullying Zionists in the public domain.
Oh my God.
When there was a residence where Jewish students lived, they had an Israeli flag outside. Somebody stole the flag. Nobody knew who did it. She praised this person online, calling them the Spider-Man of Burlington, anonymously doing good for having stolen this flag. And then she had this one tweet where she said, is it ethical for me, a TA, she's teaching assistant, just to deny participation credit to Zionists? Wow. I think it would be good and funny, she writes. -5 points for going on Birthright in 2018, -10 points for posting a pic of yourself with a tank in the Golan Heights, and -2 points just because I hate your vibe in general. And this would form the basis of our complaint. And the Department of Education the way these cases get resolved is they negotiate a settlement because the universities don't want to lose their money. So they say, okay, what do we need to do? So among other things, the Department of Education required that they revise their anti-discrimination policies and their training to address this kind of harassment and discrimination, which they called a form of national origin discrimination on the basis of shared ancestry. So in other words, it's not just, oh, you're Israeli, that's your national origin. Now, if you're part of a people that have a shared ancestry and ethnicity, it's almost like a national ancestry discrimination. And so this kind of discrimination is now recognized by the Department of Education as a form of national origin discrimination on the basis of shared ancestry, or we'll call it national ancestry discrimination. This, you can see just more recently, and I don't know if you followed this, but within the last month or so, NYU revised its anti-discrimination policy to explicitly include Zionists in that anti-discrimination policy and recognize that for many students on campus, Zionism is an integral part of what it means to them to be Jewish, and that if you're going to exclude Zionists or use stereotypes or terms to kind of vilify the Zionists, that could be a violation of their anti-discrimination policy. We also, within the last month, had we reached a settlement with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. They also recognize that for many students on the campus, Zionism is an integral part of their identity as a Jew. So this is a very important development legally, right, in terms of protecting Jews.
So let me...
You want to go back to the other question I realized what you asked, which I didn't get to.
What was the other question?
I
don't remember.
That was about the anti-Palestinian racism. I realize now as we got to this, which we can come back to.
Okay, go.
Ask me if you're...
Okay, I mean, you have... This woman is a powerhouse of such important knowledge. I hope you're like taking it in like a sponge like I am. That's why I'm just letting you talk it through. Unbelievable. Such important information. So I'm going to give a follow-up question and then we'll go back to the other one, all right?
Okay.
And then we'll close it off. I'm going to push back.
Okay.
I'm going to push back. Even with everything you are doing in the legal sphere, even with, in a sense, forcing the universities to be changing their policies, protocols, whatever. Am I mistaken if if my conclusion is, wait a second, maybe that will make a dent, but so long as the teachers, the professors, the heads of departments continue to teach these anti-Semitic materials, that the universities allow them to remain in their jobs and use those materials and continue putting out new materials and teaching more students and another generation of students, that it's really just a Band-Aid effect and it's still going to snowball and be extremely dangerous, not just for the Jewish students on campuses, but for the Jewish community in America, and snowball to impact all of America, because as we all know, any students of history, any society that allows anti-Semitism to mainstream ends up self-destructing their own society. So, what do you have to say about that?
So yes, but, but now I'll tell you why what I just explained to you is also a way to begin to chip away at that.
Okay, please.
And it goes back to the question that I hadn't answered before.
Good.
The narrative that's being taught, when you talk about what is actually being taught on the campuses, what the professors are teaching, the narrative is one that basically says as follows. It's alleging that everything that happened in the land that we call Israel, right? They say everything that happened in this land since creation is Palestinian. So yes, there were Jews.
Okay, well, I want to clarify. You are now referring to the fact that professors, that intellectuals on the campuses are putting out these hypotheses and intellectual papers as research.
Correct. This is the underlying narrative that is the basis for much of the literature that students are reading, they're being given to read. That is the basis of, and it's in all sorts of disciplines, right? It can be in the humanities, so it can be in the gender studies, it can be in psychology, it can be in in English. I mean, it can be in any of these disciplines. The underlying narrative, the underlying basic belief, right, is that everything that happened in the land is Palestinian. Okay, they say yes, there were Jews, there were Christians, there were Muslims that lived in this land, but that's just their faith. That's just their religious identity. The cultural, ethnic identity of everyone that's lived in this land since creation is Palestinian. This is where you get the idea Jesus was a Palestinian. You may have heard this one.
Yeah.
Right? And then what they say...
Jesus the Jew was a Palestinian.
Right. So here, then what they say is, we know the difference between the Jews and the Zionists. The Jews are those who recognize that Judaism is just a faith. The Zionists, they say, are the ones who are trying to erase this Palestinian identity by calling it Jewish. And how do you, here's an example of where you see this. So just before October 7th, there was a conference at the University of Pennsylvania called the Palestine Rights Festival, WRITES. You may have heard about it. Everybody was talking about how they had invited all of these anti-Semites to come speak. It was like a 3-day conference. It ended just before Kol Nidre on Yom Kippur.
Oh, wow.
In
2023.
And people were up in arms complaining about this conference. And to defend the conference, the organizer of the conference sent a letter to the president of the university, because this was supposed to be all about celebrating Palestinian culture, Palestinian literature. I was curious, by the way, I asked students, I said, can you celebrate Palestinian culture without demonizing the Jew? And sure enough, he said, I want to know how many of these sessions don't mention Jew or Israeli or Zionist, right? I think there were 2 out of 50 or 60, because the whole... I figured, okay, if you're defining your identity as a refugee, so you'll want to blame somebody for that refugee status. But let's go back, let's say before 1917, before the British mandate for Palestine, what exactly is the heritage that you're discussing? And that's where this letter came in. And this letter said, we're this ancient people, right? And we... converted between Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and we went back and forth, right? But we know the difference. This letter says that we know the difference between the Jews and the Zionists, exactly as I said to you, because the Zionists are the ones who are deliberately trying to destroy our history and our heritage here. And so now, going back to your original question, which was about the anti-Semitism in the Palestinian liberation movement, what's happened now is there's a term that is being used, again, across disciplines. And it's not just in the United States. In Canada, it's really being widely used, which they're calling anti-Palestinian racism. And the way they're defining this term, anti-Palestinian racism, is as anything that pushes back against this narrative that I just described for you. So in other words, if you say, I am part of the Jewish people who are indigenous to the land of Israel, that's racist, because that is challenging or erasing this narrative that everything in this land was Palestinian. This is today's Zionism equals racism.
Wow.
This is how the expression of my identity as a Jew is now being defined as racist. And that's a huge problem. But the answer to that, I think, is for Jews to be saying, are you kidding me? We, of course, are a people. Our history is in this land. You can't deny it. The archaeology is here, right? And for you to erase my identity,
right,
or for you to demand that I deny my identity, right, that's discriminatory.
Right. Even though it's crazy because they're brilliant. they are brilliant because what they are doing is they're basically saying, yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, you lived there, but you were Palestinians and when we converted, meaning they're using an intellectual somersault that basically allows us to tell our story, but yet then say we're denying them their identity. All using intellectual somersaults. Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Yes, so the answer to that is Jewish knowledge and Jewish pride and Jewish unity. That's the other thing. There is no doubt that if the Jews remain united, and I think this is what you heard me saying when we were talking outside earlier, if the Jews remain united, we will come through this, no doubt. If we turn on each other, our enemies, they can just sit and watch as we destroy ourselves.
Right.
But I have faith. I listen to the students, and I will tell you we are in an absolutely remarkable moment. Because on the campuses today, the Hillels and the Chabads will tell you there is record engagement with them. Now, the sad fact is that it's because all of these students who grew up outside the bubble are coming inside the Jewish bubble.
Because of the hatred.
Because of the hatred, and that's what anti-Semitism does.
Right.
But what's happening is they're coming inside the bubble and they're learning more about what this Jewish identity that meant enough to them that they didn't want to give it up, that they were ready to forego sometimes the relationships that they would have outside the bubble. But they're coming inside the bubble and they're learning more about their identity. They're learning more about their identity in connection to Israel.
Right.
That's the remarkable thing. People are saying, I'm part of a people connected to Israel. It's not just I'm part of the Jewish people, but I'm part of the Jewish people connected to Israel.
Right.
And my roots and my history and my heritage are rooted here.
Right.
And that's why my people have a right to self-determination in this land. It's extraordinary. And so I have no doubt that when we come through this as a people, we will come through more united, better educated, right, with a much deeper understanding of our roots and our history and our heritage, with a greater empathy, I think, for fellow Jews, right? I'm excited about the Jewish people that will come through on the earth. I think that we'll get there. There's no doubt it will be a painful process between here and there, but I have complete faith that what we will live to see at the other end is going to be amazing.
I couldn't ask for a better ending to this powerful schmooze interview with you, Alyza. And anyone who follows my Pulse of Israel programming knows that basically you just encapsulated everything I'm always saying as well, which is, yes, we're going to come out of this more stronger and more united than ever before, the Jewish people, the Jewish state of Israel. And it's hurtful and sad that it's taken a horrendous tragedy and traumatic tragedy that we're going to be living with as a society, especially the Jewish people in Israel experiencing that, and anyone who living there has soldiers in their family, as friends, etc., on a deeper level. But yes, we're going to come out of this more stronger and more united than ever before. Alyza, thank you so much for this talk. I'm so glad we bumped into each other over Shabbat and able to have that little schmooze, and then able to have this talk now afterwards and record it for everyone to be able to internalize and grow stronger from as well. Anybody, if you know any college student that needs assistance, child, grandchild, child of a family, how do they contact you, Alyza?
So the best way is reach out to us by email, info@brandeiscenter.com. BRANDEISCENTER.com. info@brandeiscenter.com. And we're here to help. We're here to help students. We help faculty. And we also now actually are helping beyond the campuses, employees in the workforce. Anyone who's experiencing the anti-Semitism, please reach out to us and we'll try and help you.
Okay, and if you have any if you have any doubt after you just hear this this interview with her, you're definitely calling Alyza and the Brandeis Center for assistance. They are on top of this to the T and for years, even before October 7th. Alyza, thank you so much on behalf of the Jewish people. Critical, important work. All right, everyone, that's it for another Pulse of Israel, signing out of the IAC conference in Washington, D.C., hopefully going home. If you are not yet a subscriber to the Pulse of Israel, go to pulseofisrael.com, where you get the belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect truth about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world that you hardly get anywhere else. And again, we are a donor-based operation. So if this information is important to you, you know we're highly censored on the internet over social media. So it's due to your support that we're able to make our content and get it out there for people to see. Every once in a while, just click on the donate button on pulseofisrael.com. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.